People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
And you're going.
The only verdict is vengeance, a vendetta, held as a votive not in vain, for the value and veracity of such shall one day vindicate the vigilant and the virtuous.
I'm going to try to take credit for winning the war by dropping the 2 bombs, and he goes, wait a minute, we're out here fighting the war, and you have a bunch of Jewish scientists making a bomb, and you think you're going to get credit? And this infuriated Eisenhower. So what happens? Eisenhower basically makes it miserable for Groves. Groves gets excommunicated from the military in 1947, but the way out the door, he's the guy that set up the first military coup. Remember I told you that the military was pure, but it went bad? Yeah. What is the line in the sand?
41?
No, the line in the sand for the military when they go fraudulent was the 4th election for FDR. The vice for FDR for those 3 times is a guy named Henry Wallace. Best way for me to describe him to you today, it's like seeing Bernie Sanders. Henry Wallace gives a speech in 1942 that after the war, he sees the future of America as a common man. Well, you can only imagine Groves is doing the Manhattan Project, building his bombs, and he's like, that's not my vision for what the future is. My vision for the future is the military is going to be strong and da-da-da-da-da. And in the 4th term, Guillain Barre is getting so bad, Groves knows that FDR is going to die. So he goes to the most powerful guy in the U.S. Senate, is a guy named Jimmy Burns from South Carolina. Jimmy Burns holds this distinction. He's the only person in U.S. history that's been Secretary of State, Senate, and House of Representatives. No one's ever held all 3 positions. Oh. So Jimmy Burns gets the DNC to deinstall Wallace and put up no-name Manchurian candidate. Who is that? Harry Truman. He's a senator from Missouri. So literally, the DNC in December of 44 gets stopped by Jimmy Burns. Magically, in those 9 minutes, they close all the voting. Henry Wallace led the first 3 ballots. Next day he comes in, everything gets completely flipped. They make all kinds of backdoor deals in Chicago. Truman's in. Why? Because Groves knows that he can control Truman. What was the control card that he used? When he got out of the military, he had Henry Truman put in the National Security Act that got the CIA in. CIA is all of his friends, George Kennan, all Bill Donovan, the Dulles brothers. Got it? And when he goes outside, remember, I want you to think—
The CIA was in charge of the country at this point?
Correct. They weren't in charge truly of the country. Still, I would tell you, the Joint Chiefs, the Eisenhowers, the MacArthur, they were powerful. The president's got a lot of power. But because Truman is in, Truman didn't even know the bomb existed the first months that he was president. You know who told him? Not Groves, Jimmy Burns. And tells him, Truman makes Jimmy Burns the Secretary of State. Turns out, why does that become important in this whole historical story? Remember I told you about Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam? Potsdam is when Churchill, Stalin, and Truman meet. Everything that promised FDR at the other 2 meetings to Russia gets flipped on a dime because Burns tells Truman, you tell him he's now the enemy. We're not rebuilding Russia. We're just going to rebuild Europe. And just so you know, the Marshal, General Marshal, he's also a pilgrim, also Council of Foreign Relations guy. Just so you know who we're dealing with. So what I'm telling you is everything goes awry when they push General Groves outside. What happens? Eisenhower thinks he's okay with this. Who's Eisenhower's vice president? Nixon. Nixon thinks he's okay. General Groves needs to have, because, you know, he's a military guy. He doesn't have any. Goes out and becomes CEO of Remington Rand. Remington Rand is the #1 weapons supplier of the U.S. military. General Groves is in a position to know that because he had the highest security clearance. He becomes a messenger, and then he finds another company, called Burroughs. Burroughs sells calculators, mini computers, flashlights, but they're big electronics. He merges the 2 together. You know what those 2 companies become? Sperry. What does Sperry get renamed? gets renamed Unisys. What does Sperry do in time outside the military? They make UNIVAC computers. UNIVAC computers that they wind up selling back to the US military. Do you know why? Because in 1957, the Russians put Sputnik up in space. And this caught Nixon and Eisenhower completely by surprise. But guess who didn't catch by surprise? Groves, because Groves knew what was going on because of his time in the Manhattan Project. That's when Eisenhower has to bring Groves and his industrial military complex back into the federal government. What was that called in 1958, Robert? DARPA. First was ARPA. What was the first project that ARPA did? First Groves did, he linked Stanford, Johns Hopkins, all the little colleges that you learned about in COVID together with a computer. Got it? Something else happens. Eisenhower changes the name 58 to DARPA. And then I already told you about Eisenhower's little farewell speech and that the biggest risk. Why? Because he didn't trust Groves at any level. This proves to you that I'm right. But what's happening outside the scenes? How does Groves get the money? He starts working with Meyer Lansky. Meyer Lansky is bringing Groves money left and right, hand over fist. Who introduces Groves to Howard Hughes? Meyer Lansky. So guess why Howard Hughes is linked to this whole story? Because he now becomes the benefactor. He's like the Rockefeller that wasn't tied to the banking institution. He was the bank for Meyer Lansky and General Groves that fueled the growth of the industrial military complex outside the military. So when General Groves retires, he's officially done in 61. Remember, all his people now are brought back in for 3 years into Eisenhower's White House. We have the election, Kennedy comes in, you know the story there. Meyer Lansky, now J. Edgar Hoover, his ass about that $3 million I told you found. We have the best forensic accountants in the world in the IRS, and they can't find out a goddamn place where this money went. Like, it's like it vanished from the face of the earth. J. Edgar Hoover is beside himself because he knows that he has to get Lansky on some kind of deal like they got Capone, like tax evasion, to get him and sidetrack from being up for him. So what effectively happens is they can't catch anybody in Vegas for almost 13 years. And then we have a change with LBJ coming in into Nixon. And Ira Malnick is out. Ira Malnick, just so you know, how did he become tight with the military? He worked Army intelligence 53 through 57. So that's why he's connected the story. How did I find all this out? I found this out when I met with Becker at our famous 2007 meeting, because he's the one that figured out who canceled him. It was all the guys in the industrial military complex. So when I started to learn about all these things that Lansky was doing, I thought it was interesting. Becker told me something that I will never forget. And I thought it was a minor part of the story. He said, Jack, have you looked at the Munitions Act that was created after World War II? And I said, no. He goes, you're going to find something very interesting. Cryptography is part of the Munitions Act.
Right.
And do you know why that was the case? He's the one that clued me in. He goes, because Turing didn't do what everybody thinks he did. He was sending messages from the royal family and the Rothschilds to the Nazis. That was the only way they had communication. The second way is what I told you. The King of Spain had a cousin that was a runner between the papacy and there. That's how they kept the connection going. And the reason why they made part of the Munitions Act is because it was so successful that nobody ever found out the real story, what Turing was really up to.
Right. This came up decades later with the BitTorrent case where they're trying to...
Correct.
I'm sorry, PGP, not BitTorrent.
Right.
Pretty good privacy software. Yeah, they were trying to classify it as munitions to prevent its exploitation.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's what brings us to the next part of the story. In the 60s, J. Edgar Hoover is going fucking crazy to figure out what happens. And Ira Malnick found out that J. Edgar Hoover has got a subpoena out in 68. This is at the end of LBJ's reign and Nixon's coming in. So they know there's going to be a change of AGs between Ramsey Hunt and Nixon's guy, who's going to be John Mitchell. And Ira tells, look, the Israel guys set up a program they had for Lee Oswald when they tried to kill Castro with the SV-40 laden cigar. That's why he was able to go to Soviet and come back in so that Castro would think he was a commie. And so Israel came up with the idea that any Jew, no matter what's in your history, you can come back to Israel and they'll give you protection and give you a passport. So he tells Lansky, to avoid the subpoena, you may want to go and do this. So Lansky's really pissed off. He's like, look, I helped these cocksuckers. I set them up in the military. This guy and the FBI, because remember, the FBI at this time and the CIA, they're like two separate wings of intelligence. One is international, one is homebound, and really linked to the CIA side and to the guys that are running the military. So he's furious because he feels like he's been fucked because he's been a patriot this whole time. So he goes, okay, to Ira, he goes, hold my beer. He goes to Israel in 1969, avoids the subpoena. Finally, the new Attorney General, John Mitchell, gets Israel to allow them to Lansky. And then Lansky, before he has the famous meeting, calls in the Mossad, calls in the guys that are the prime minister. I think it was Golda Meir at the time. And he said, I'm going to do something unusual. It's going to make all of you feel uncomfortable. He goes, I'm going to tell them the truth. And they look at him like, what do you mean you're going to tell them the truth? And this is just like the Top Gun story. I'm going to let him come closer. None of them have any clue about what he's about to do. So he was working with two people, a guy named Bill Hamilton and his wife. They came up with some weird software right at this time. It's called the Promise software, PROMIS. This was used in attorney general's offices, okay? That they could keep up their case log. It turns out that it had a back door on it. It actually gave Lansky access to the IRS computer. And he knew everything the Federal Reserve was doing before they did it for a long period of time. And he was having his computer people update this information. And what else was he doing? He used the Promise software to infect just about every single big government around.
Why is it that Democrats are so insistent that unlimited numbers of illegals from countries that are incapable of managing their own affairs come here? Countries like Somalia, countries like Haiti, countries that have no history of successful self-government, and they want unlimited numbers of illegals from those countries and refugees from those countries to come here with no chance at the pace, the scale, the scope of arrivals at being able to assimilate and integrate into the American way.
Karen of mayors, the mayor of Karen's, Karen Bass. Perfectly fit. And then we got the Joker. So outside of all the comedy, what's going on is absolutely unacceptable. We allowed it to happen for too long. So let's just take some responsibility. And here's the thing. I'm a business owner. Most of us in California are self-employed because you can't get any jobs here. And if you do have a job, you can't afford to live here. So I propose that we create our own general fund, because we have irresponsible people that take our money and give it to illegal people, and then they pay people, because they paid all those people to come out and attack our law enforcement, who we pay for too. So our tax dollars fighting our tax dollars. That's not the moral of the story. That's not even the worst part. But the number one thing is, though, it's enough of Gavin Newsom. We got real problems, and what's going to happen in 10 years when nobody can get a mortgage, and what's going to happen probably in the next year and a half to 2 years if this crap keeps up, when we can't get any insurance, especially business owners. I don't know if you guys realize this, but nothing happens without insurance. And if you see how these people treat insurance and how they have no regard for anything, you kind of see that basically what you have is the equivalent of a drunk driver, right? You have negligence. You have somebody that if you let them keep driving, you're going to go off the cliff. You're basically off the cliff. We can maybe get out of the car and, let's put it like this. We got two, let's call them doom loops here. Three. We got the economy. We got the psychos in Washington, D.C. that just have to have war, and they invent this bull crap. Sounds just like 20 years ago. I do not believe any of this bullshit about Iran. That Netanyahu has been nothing but a lying fuck. Go back in history. And these people, the real scary thing is we have 3 viable suspects, okay, for the terrorist attack that is going to come. Why? Because they have to get us all supporting this bullshit war we're not behind. And who the hell wants to go and fuck with Iran? Now here's